Blake, who's your favorite church tech of all time?
Toby, which of your children is your favorite?
Welcome to the ChurchGear podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who never picks between family members, and I'm here with my co-host who has every church tech he's ever met power ranked from first to last, Toby Walters.
Just like I have my kids power ranked, but it changes depending on the day.
Do you ever use that to get them to behave or like hold that over them?
I often like to joke with them, like, one of you is my favorite. And they're like, wait, which one? But I won't tell them.
Well, and the real truth is Ellie's your favorite kid, you know, your dog.
No, my dog is my least favorite because she eats her poop. And I mean, that's just offensive. That's of the devil, Blake.
Is this a bad time to tell you, Toby? Never mind. All right.
So I don't rank, like, we all have favorites in this world, but we don't say them because we love all our church tech family. But we got to hang out with several of our favorites. So we just went down to Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, and Justin Firesheets, our buddy, did a kind of tech leader gathering of just a handful of production guys to just kind of like come around and talk about issues that are going on, and they're either, you know, technical or the soft skills as well. And it was a good time. And we also got to spend time just with our friends at Highlands.
I have no idea who you're talking about. I know a Bill Firesheets. I don't know a Justin Firesheets.
Yeah, sorry, Justin. Your name is Bill around here. But Blake, we got a lot of time with Highlands getting a tour and doing some video tour content. And I mean, can we tell people that that's going to be up on our YouTube at some point? Or
yeah, I mean, anywhere between the next 2 days to 59 months, it'll be there.
So lots of behind the scenes tech tour. If you're ever wondering, like, how does Highlands do what they do? What gear do they have? That's going to be really fun to see.
What does it look behind their projector screen?
Yes, because we did find that. And then we also got to tour Highlands College. And I had kind of heard a little bit about it, but hadn't been yet. And Blake, what did you think of Highlands College?
In a word, prestigious.
Yeah. We got to tour kind of classroom spaces and the, you know, common areas. And then they do have a campus. I think it's called their Grandview campus that is on the campus of the college. But, you know, it's been 20 something years since I went to college. And I was like, this place is amazing. And they do have a tech arts specific track for a degree. And we went down, Blake, like, do you remember some of the gear that they're teaching on?
Yeah, they made sure to have an old analog console mixed in with the Digico. It was an Allen and Heath 3000?
GL 3000, dude. Yeah. Well, it might have been an ML. I might have even gotten it wrong. But I love how they had, you know, in their audio specific room, they had an M32 and they had, I think it was a DM7, a Yamaha. Then they had the Digico 225. And then over on the other side, they had the old school analog.
And when we said, where's the M7? And they were like, no one uses the M7. And we were like, well, someone's buying them from us.
That's right.
And they had the entire Bible printed on the wall on just 3 levels. I really don't see how they could fit it all, but it was tiny, tiny font.
Yeah, that was super cool to see on the walls. They had like the entire Bible, like you said. I wonder what translation it was. We didn't ask.
I think it was American. I could read it.
American. And I just love they had a lighting room, they had a video room, and they even had a tech room. And they said, you know, we're not going to let people get out of here without knowing how to solder cables and do basic repairs, because that is high level stuff. When you are in production, you need to know how to fix things rather than, oh, that cable's broke, throw it away, let's buy another one.
It was really smart to, like, even though it was a nice campus, they made sure you got the full breadth of gear, because they're trying to send people out to the church and you don't know what you're going to walk into.
Yeah, you can walk into Highlands where you have, you know, an SSL at front of house of the broadcast campus, or you could walk into another church where you have a ML 3000, an old school analog desk.
And you could walk into a room and accidentally see the live sound market manager at Sweetwater. So if it's live or commercial production, it's this man. It's Kent Morris joining us today. Kent, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, guys.
Blake, I thought you were going to say, and speaking of old school analog, Ken Morris.
I would never.
Ken, is it offensive to call you old school? Or are you like, oh,
not at all? I embrace it.
Do you remember the very first console you ever mixed on? You ever touched?
Oh, sure. It'd be a PVXR 600.
Woo!
That didn't take him a second to remember.
I mean, I remember mine too.
What was yours?
Everyone remembers their first.
I know. It was a Biamp 16 channel analog.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's good stuff, Blake. What was the first console you ever touched, Blake?
I can just see the memories like washing over both of y'all's faces right now. And y'all look so nostalgic. I think we should buy those consoles again and have a mix off.
Great. I mean, Kent's going to win, but I'm happy to, show up very poorly to this mix off.
Oh, you have faders. I just have pots, so it would be not a good run.
Well, speaking of winning and losing, let's do our weekly game of 5 Truths and a Lie, where Toby and I compete to see what's the one lie out of the guest truths so we can introduce them. Number 1. Kent was, all right, Toby, I don't know how to say these words. Kent was born in
Cuernavaca,
Mexico to missionary parents and then brought out to the States with a
mordida
via a coffee can full of U.S. coins. Wait a minute.
Is he a member of the cartel? Like, this sounds like a cartel moment, but
Mordida says bride. So he was brought back with a bride?
I changed that just to mess with you. It's actually a bribe.
Oh my gosh. His dad was a renowned musician who played in the house band What when Elvis came to Louisiana hayride. Unfortunately, Kent wasn't the same caliber musician, and so he had to become an audio engineer.
Aren't all production people failed musicians?
That's mean. That's just a lie we tell you, Toby, to make you feel better.
Oh, thank you.
One Sunday, Dr. Stanley stopped the service and demanded Kent come on stage to first hear and then fix a noise in the sound system. I hope that's true.
Yes.
Number 4, Paul Balucci and
Paul Balash
and Kent got lost in Canada on the way to a concert and missed the first hour. Number 5, Kent collects old, weird cars like gremlins. Well, it says cars. Does he mean cards?
No, I think he's meaning cars.
There's a gremlin car?
I'm not sure, honestly. We'll find out.
Number 6, in Zambia, Kent had to convince the local power company to hotwire the sound system to the pole in order to have sound for 20,000 people. That's a pole you don't want to dance on.
I wonder if you used that mordida to bribe them.
Man, okay, I really have no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that...
I'm going to say the cars is a lie.
Sure. The Gremlins is a dead giveaway. I'll say number 4, I guess, that they were not an hour late to a show in Canada. Because, I mean, it's Canada. There's no traffic. There's no people that live there.
Okay, Kent, what's the lie?
All right, the lie was Canada.
Oh, come on.
Yes.
Don't get points to Blake.
Kent is an upstanding citizen. He would never be late to something.
He doesn't even know how to pronounce Zambia.
Well,
it's Zambia.
Who, Kent? He knows
No,
how to pronounce it.
You called it Zambia.
Of course I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm the CPO or CMPO, Chief Mispronouncing Officer.
There you go.
Okay, Kent, tell us about getting called on stage to fix that service mid-service.
Oh, with Dr. Stanley. So, yes, at First Baptist Atlanta, when he was there, obviously for 51 years, he pastored there. We had, In Touch was essentially the broadcast division for First Baptist and then split into a separate company. And they would bring the broadcast trucks on. And when I was running front of house, I would be on comm, of course, with the trucks. And one particular Sunday, Dr. Stanley's preaching along, nothing's unusual. He stops, addresses the audience and says, "Do you hear that?" And all the people said no. And he said, "All right, we continue on." He started preaching again. Second time he said, "I'm hearing it. Where's Morris?" And you have that walk of shame. You feel like a dog with the cone of shame on your head as you meander your way to the front and stand there next to Dr. Stanley as he says, "Do you hear that?" And you have to honestly say, "No, sir, I don't." He said, "We're going to stand here till you do."
Oh, man.
What?
And there's a very awkward moment. And of course, my comm is lit up with people in the truck screaming at me. But then I hear a noise. Finally, I hear a noise. And I look down, and it's our EAW wedges. Now, of course, we'd always mute every output, every input when Dr. Stanley's on deck because nothing matters except that one mic. But the noise was particular, and I knew what it was. It was basically output capacitors of the power amp going bad, cycling themselves around. Even though the output to them had been muted, they were generating that internally. He said, "Do you hear that?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "I'm going to fix it, Dr. Stanley." So I reach down, take the NL4s out, tuck them in behind it. It goes away. We stand there long enough for him to be satisfied. He says, "All right, give him a round of applause and go back to mixing." That was a Sunday with Dr. Stanley.
Oh my gosh, how much were you sweating under your suit that day?
Oh, that suit went into the trash immediately upon arriving home.
That's so amazing. So Blake and I were at Highlands College just yesterday, and they had Darius Daniels as the guest speaker in their chapel service, and they were experiencing some beard noise on his mic. And they were kind of joking like, well, we're all fired tomorrow, but they're kind of debating, should we send somebody out on stage to fix it, or is that more noticeable than just letting it continue to happen? So apparently Dr. Stanley was not interested in continuing to let it happen.
No, we were not allowed to have anything like that. And of course, that was the pucker moment, shall we say, every Sunday, is being able to get him on the deck without having some malady from the DPA, whether it was him hugging someone and the boom moving out, or any number of things can happen. So that was always a scary moment.
Yeah,
mighty bold of a pastor to be mean on stage in front of everybody.
Yeah.
No, not mean. You have to understand, in the sense that Dr. Stanley walked the walk. Behind the scenes in the green room, he's exactly the same person. He just wants things right, and he had that in himself and expected it of others. We were there to produce something that 20 million people were going to watch that week, and it needed to be right.
Yeah.
So we tell people, a lot of times, if you look through and at the scale that he presented, it was essentially a Super Bowl every Sunday. And so we're producing a Super Bowl, and there's a lot of pressure on that, but there's also the fact that one service impacts tens of millions of people just in the coming week, but then hundreds of millions of people that will have it all across the world in the next 5 years. So it corresponds to what needs to be done. So I wouldn't call it mean. I would call him direct.
Yeah.
Ken is such a nice guy. He not only fixed it, but he's saving face for this mean Dr. Stanley, whoever he is.
So tell us about your dad played with Elvis.
Well, so my dad was a great musician he was born in the 30s during the Depression, and had that gifting. I'm sure people have that gifting, and was able to then get on Louisiana Hayride, which was the alternative to the Opry. And when Elvis got kicked off the Opry, he came to Louisiana Hayride. My dad was the utility player in the band. Played basically anything that needed to be played, and Elvis was there for some time. My dad then gave that up and went to seminary, and that's how he ended up in Mexico as a missionary.
Okay.
But yeah.
Why did Elvis get kicked out of the Opry?
He was a little
racy,
loose below the hips, below the waist, kind of. It was a conservative environment.
Do you know about this, Blake? That his hip swayed in a way that was much too racy for public audiences, and so TV would cut off below his waist. They would only film him above the waist.
Yeah, I remember something like that, and he got into so much kerfluffle that they made him sign up for the army. I only know what Elvis's life is about from Austin Butler's movie about Elvis. That's all I really know. Even though I went to Graceland.
And then Blake, that's why for the podcast we have this desk in front of us, because you are much too racy below the waist for general audience.
Well, I'm not wearing anything. Okay, Kent, tell us about collecting cars that are gremlins. I thought gremlins were the things to keep from eating at midnight.
Well, yeah, it's kind of an inside joke within the company that built it. But having grown up on the mission field, we had inexpensive, reliable vehicles. So they were International Scouts, which is making a return right now since Volkswagen owns it, and also Ramblers and other American Motors products, which was kind of the fourth version of the big three. So you had Ford, GM, and Chrysler, but then American Motors was a combination of the old Nash Motors and Hudson, and they merged in 1954, and their products were very reliable but very cost effective. So they worked really well for missionaries with no money, and we had Ramblers all through my childhood, and then they debuted the Gremlin, which was basically a subcompact, the first American subcompact. It served me well as my first car, and then 50 years later, I'm now collecting them along with other kind of weird, odd cars.
How many weird, odd cars do you have?
Well, I've sold off a lot of them because my wife said, "What are we doing with all these cars here?" And but it's fun because it's the antithesis of a digital multiplexed world, where you have basically a carburetor and a very simple engine, and you can look inside and fix anything.
Yeah.
Versus anything today, you essentially nothing's mechanical; it's all electronic. So it gives a nice counterbalance to that.
And I actually collect weird old employees, and I've got one so far.
I am not old, Toby. I'm just very weird.
All right, Kent.
See, weird is good.
This is true. That's why I keep you around, Blake. You keep me entertained.
The first compliment I've ever gotten from Toby. I will cherish it.
So, Kent, there's a rumor running around that you came out of the womb in a lime green suit, that you were in a suit from day one. Is that true? And also, can you give us a quick snapshot of your background in church production?
Sure. Just having grown up in a Baptist environment, of course, it's going to be a little conservative. But then working with Dr. Stanley for so long, his statements to us were to always do your best, look your best, and be your best. And, suit was required. It's something I just always have done. It just fits.
Yeah. And you look good in them, my friend.
Well, you're very kind. I appreciate it. It kind of counterbalances my age, shall we say.
Yeah, right before we started recording, Toby goes, "Is Kent going to wear a suit?" And I go, "What's a percentage above 100?" And then here you are for the first time in my life I've ever seen you not in a suit. So that's pretty funny.
I'm enjoying this slumming. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Welcome to the dark side, Kent.
That's right. And then the background, since my dad was so musical and grew up in a musical family, when we were on the mission field, we had old reel-to-reel recorders and 16 millimeter projectors, and they would break, and no facility was nearby to fix them. And I took them apart and went, "Oh, that does to this." It kind of made sense. It was logical. Started working on that, and then found that I was a much better technician than musician. And when you're the keyboard player and you're getting paid $50 in the band, or you buy the PA and you get paid $300 in the band, that was the path to choose. And from that, got really blessed to get on things like Promise Keepers and a lot of really big events and, purpose-driven conferences, and worked with Maranatha, worked with Integrity, toured with numbers of artists or Christian artists. And all of those things were just a series of blessings that I had essentially nothing to do with, in the sense that I wasn't any better than anybody else. It just, I happened to be at point X when that was needed.
Yeah.
So from that, took off and had a really strong career for the past 40 years with both on the manufacturing side and the retail side.
Blake, I'm going to throw this out there, and I actually mean it. Like, I believe there's so much value in taking apart things and seeing how they're put together. And I think there's probably a lot of young church techs out there that have never done that, because, gear is just different these days. If you want some gear for your church that you can just give to your young guys to take apart, we've got it. So reach out to ChurchGear and we'll send you some gear that is unfixable. And then your young guys can take it apart and see how signal flow works. What do you think, Blake?
I think you just volunteered to ship a lot of stuff for free. And I mean, I don't pay the bills.
Pay for shipping and we'll send it out to you. How about that?
We have a giant bin of just all the gear, Kent, that we get in that's like, "Oh, this is not working, nor is it fixable." And we call it the Thai Fury bin. He comes and gets it. So yeah, anytime we want to do something funny for like a social media video, we pull it out of there. And then people are always in the comments like, "I can't believe you broke that." We're like, it wasn't working.
It was already broken. All right, Kent. So, I'll give the, the angry old man cliche back in my day, but you've told us that you've been in church production for 45 years. So talk to us about what production was like in church at that point.
The fascinating thing is looking at production within church as both the sort of the OG of production and then also the latecomer. And the sense that if you go back 100 years and you look at Billy Sunday, for instance, who was an evangelist, had been a professional baseball player and became a Christian, and then went out on these crusades, kind of Billy Graham 50 years prior. When he built his church in New Jersey, it's a 4,000 or 5,000 seat room. It's all wood and there's no sound system. So he's able to speak to 5,000 people with no PA because he had a voice that was basically, I call it the JBL squawk. It's 2 to 4K of just piercing your face. And the combination of his voice with that room, which was built of wood to reflect energy in the vocal range. So he's able to communicate. Teddy Roosevelt communicated to thousands of people in open air settings because of his body's ability to project. And it wasn't until the advent of sound systems in general, starting with Al Jolson's Jazz Singer, the first talkie movie in 1927, that we built buildings then not for acoustic reinforcement, but because we could build them as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And the more efficient we make the building, the more sound reinforcement we need. So it's counterproductive. So today a building is built to house people, get them in, get them out, be aesthetically pleasing, and be as cheap as possible. That's the prerogative for public gathering spaces, whether that's a stadium or a church. And because of that, that need then for gear, which you and I delve in every day, has grown exponentially. And so a 150-seat church 100 years ago needed no sound system. Today, a 150-seat church must have a sound system. And because of that need, then that is where ChurchGear to me comes into such a play, because as the technology moves forward, more features, more advantages, more benefits. At the same time, those are not necessarily needed in a local church. And having a way to get what was amazing 10 years ago and is totally functional today into the hands of people who cannot afford or who don't see the value from leadership in certain areas, or even a third option would be they don't really need all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
They just need something that works. Having that, you guys play such a strong part in this. You're the catalyst, that connection point between the need and the function. And I just love what you guys do because of that.
Yeah, we do. We move most of the gear in America. Unlike Sweetwater, we move that gear.
I know that small, cute little company up in Fort Wayne. Like, we love those guys, but yeah, we definitely move 100 times more gear, 1,000 times more gear, right?
Hang on, wait. I'm getting something from the front. Oh, we do 100,000 times less.
That's it. That's it.
Wrong.
We love Sweetwater. So Kent, I remember, my dad was a kind of traveling singer in church when I was young, and he had a Ross sound system, and it was a powered mixer with 2 speakers on sticks. And there wasn't much about getting a good mix. It's just, can you hear what you need to hear? And that's it. Like, there was no video, there was no lighting. Like, there was not really a discipline of like technical arts. And so how have you seen that change, and like what skill sets today are needed in the world of church production that 40 years ago they didn't even exist?
You're exactly right. The change of production has been completely tied to the ability for the music aspect to then mirror what is going on in society as a whole. And as hymns from the 19th century then pulled into the early 20th century and up through the 50s, those were consistent. The methodology of communicating them through piano, orchestra, and organ were consistent, massed choirs. And so you had enough acoustic energy there to make it work. And then, as you said, with your father traveling and singing with his Ross PA, 2 speakers and a powered mixer, that then carried forward. And all of a sudden, people realized this one person with tracks or a piano, whatever they may have, would then be equally as loud as a mass of 80 people. And as church then migrated away from that family communal environment into more of a societal environment, we see how the production values changed. And the blessing for me was being early on in that in the late 70s and early 80s, as Maranatha especially and the whole West Coast Jesus movement had migrated out of the hippie movement into more mainstream. And they brought with them the drums, the guitars, the keys. And all of a sudden now, as long as it was controlled, it was moderately acceptable. But then we have no subwoofers because we have an old Altec, PA in the top there and the 6-channel powered mixer at the back. How do you get 60 cycles out of that or 40? You can't. So seeing that change in people, okay, we can add this, we can move that. And as we get into the early 90s and we start to understand, hey, we have clusters and then we have full reinforcement and we move into a praise band environment, we essentially are bringing cover bands out of the bars into the church, and we need the parts and pieces that make those things function. And as the denominations embrace that change, then we see the technology move, and then we see lighting, then we see video and staging come into play.
Yeah. I love it, Blake. We're getting like church history lesson here today.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if Kent should be teaching at a college here. I mean, he's just pulling this out of thin air. We didn't send his outline ahead of time like we normally
We'll just
do.
call this episode ChurchGear University.
Oh, I like it. We
Yeah.
just got back from Highlands
College.
University.
Yeah.
I do teach at University of Mobile.
Oh, there it is. Hang on, but you live in Atlanta, or do you live in Mobile?
It's a 5-hour commute, but it's okay. Because then I go to Pensacola for All Pro, which is owned by Sweetwater, which is an hour away. So I make a trek down and I teach at UM, and I go over to Pensacola and I go back to UM, then back to Pensacola and back home.
How often are you doing that commute?
It's often. Yeah. It's,
Gracious, well, he has to have a collection of cars to be able to just rotate in and out all those miles.
That's right. So Kent, also as the technology has come along, so if you, rewind back to the early days and you just had a guy that, is turning on the sound system and maybe he's just making sure the pastor's mic is up and people can hear it. He doesn't have to have any people skills. But as these, new technologies come in, as cover bands are coming out of the bars and, playing in church, I lived through those worship wars of the 90s, and I had angry people approaching the booth and screaming at me. And so there is a whole new need for these people skills and leadership and just how to engage and, develop human beings. How have you seen that come along as the technology comes, just the need for that interpersonal skills as well?
That's a great question. One of my best received articles, because I wrote for Worship Leader magazine for years since 1998, was Volume Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Powered Menace.
That's so good.
That's amazing.
And in that, we talk about the fact that I had been out on a Wayne Watson tour with Maranatha, and we were in Glory Day Lutheran Church in Houston, massive church. And we had done our bit. The guys were running sound, I was doing Maranatha. And we were running 88 dB, weighted scale slow response SPL. Tiny amounts of energy going on.
Yeah.
And received so many complaints. And then that evening, they had an organ concert. I went back for the organ concert. It's 103 all night long.
Ooh.
The same people that were complaining at 88 over Wayne Watson were just enthralled with the organ at 103.
Yeah.
It's not about the volume. It's about your preconceived notions of what music is. Making those skill changes from, like you said, turning a knob to talking to people is very difficult. And some people, especially of the older generation, are going to have a lot of preconceived notions of how things should be and why things are changing. And this isn't the church that I signed up for.
Yeah.
And then we move into today, and the change is more of, trying to get, a blended service where you make everyone equally mad into an environment where you can then authentically build community from embracing classic hymns. So this is what I love. I toured with Tommy Walker for a long time. That Tommy Walker's so good at is taking those hymns and pulling them into today without disenfranchising the people who embrace those hymns, but also bringing in people who may not have ever heard a hymn in their life, and that's the key. It's difficult. It's a challenge, and leadership having your back in the tech arts is such a blessing. If you don't have that, then you're on your own. You're just out there. And, then you get the two, if it's too loud, you're too old kind of headbutting. And we had that so often through the 90s with Maranatha and Integrity. You have people that are like Don Moen, who are very generally loved across, but then you would have artists that would be more edgy, and they would face all sorts of difficulties in those environments. And the key to me is having what I call an alligator bunny outlook, is that having that alligator skin that it just rolls off.
Yeah.
And having the bunny heart that then embraces their understanding of, hey, this is from their perspective, it's too loud. Let's see what we can do to fix this.
Yeah. It's so interesting. There's so many young production guys that, they hear about the 80s and 90s and what happened, and they work or they watch Passion or they watch Elevation. They see what's happening in these, amazing level of production environments, and they think that's just the norm. They didn't know, like, literally, we went to war to make that like an acceptable and enjoyable form of worship today. It's fascinating to hear your perspective. With who'd we go to war with, Kent?
Well, let's go to Temple Baptist Church in Albany, New York. We're out with Maranatha, and I'm out with Denise Grays and one of the teams, and Doug Matthews, whom we called Animals, on drums. And we walk in, this big, massive independent Baptist church, and the pastor comes up to me and says, "Those drums are going to be too loud." I said, "Sir, we haven't struck them yet." He said, "They're going to be too loud." He said, "I need you're responsible. If those drums get too loud, I'm shutting this whole thing down." So we have a pre-team meeting. I said, "Guys, this guy's serious. This pastor, we cannot offend him. Dougie, I need you to be completely vegetarian today. No animal, okay? No animal today." And he responded. He played with plastics and rods, and he dampened everything down, and we put a shield up, all the normal things. And we were very quiet. In fact, we were so quiet that I had brought the drums faders down dramatically, and the pastor came over to me, looked, and he said, "Those drums are too loud." And I said, "Sir, I can't go below off." Had the drums completely off. And he said, "It's still too loud." He walked on stage, shut the whole thing down. So now Denise, as a female worship leader in the 90s, has to interact with the pastor who was on stage, who's just shut us down in the middle of worship. And it wasn't a pleasant scene. She handled it very well, but that's the type of thing, Blake, that we dealt with. Everywhere we went, as cordial and gracious and kind as we could be, we would still face these insurmountable obstacles where they simply do not want that here.
Blake, at my church, and I was very young when I was in middle school when this was happening, but my dad was a music director. And so one of his favorite stories is that a sweet old lady that used to babysit him as a child came up to him after service one day. She grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and said, "Jim, if you don't turn down those drums, I'm going to kill you."
Why don't we kill the old people? This is stupid. Like, why are they so cranky? They were kids once.
You just forget, and you get, sort of set with your preferences and what you love. And then you think, the new thing coming in is ruining the sanctity and the beauty of the church and what you've, grown to love as worship. And you're going to be old someday, Blake.
We should smack people more often, like right across the face.
Toby's exactly right. Because if you consider if you go back to your senior year in high school, you're 18 years old, you're on top of the world. And whatever the top 40 at that point is in your life, when you're 18 and you're a senior, that to you defines music for the rest of your life. That's how a snare is supposed to be. That's how a bass line is supposed to be. That's how vocals are supposed to be mixed. That's how reverb is supposed to be driven in. So if you take, a Journey song, Don't Stop Believing, and you have that Steve Perry vocal and that reverb and Jonathan Cain on the keys and Neil Sean on guitar, and that becomes the band, and you then try to replicate that today, that is not how we do music anymore. But if you take a 60-year-old person there and say, that music's not right, it's not good, because it's not Journey to them. They won't tell you that, but that's the problem. And that's the mental block we all face, is getting beyond our 18-year-old self.
Well, Lord help us when the Gen Zers are older, because their top 40 is just TikTok clicks and sounds and bops.
Yeah. And Blake, whose Journey?
Hey, dude, I did Don't Stop Believing in choir in high school, okay? And that is the only song I can name from Journey.
So Kent, for those that they're bought into church production, they love what they do in their craft, and they are lifers, but they're young. Do you have any guesses as to where production's going to go over the next 40 years for churches?
And, some tips on how to make it that long, because that's a tough, journey.
Yeah, the tips to making it long, number one is never assimilate what you do with who you are. That's the biggest thing to take away. There's nothing more crushing than to have a senior pastor or worship pastor call you out and you make a mistake, and then they have to then tell everybody about it. Because I always tell the worship pastor, say, hey, if a mistake happens and nobody noticed, then we got away with it and just roll. If a mistake happens and they notice, there's no need to reinforce that because they already noticed. Either way, just roll. But if you get that hurt, then that imbides your life for the next week. That's all you think about, is the one miscue or the one 3 seconds of feedback. And the beautiful thing to remember that I have to think about every time it happens to me, because it happens to all of us, is that if you did your preparation and you did everything right, and you got the mic right and everything set up, and you had 3 seconds of feedback when the pastor walked up, God had all of eternity. He knew about that feedback. He knew at the dawn of creation that on last Sunday at 11:23 a.m. at your church, there would be 3 seconds of feedback at 2.16 kilohertz. And he chose for all of eternity not to fix it or to change 1 micron of thing to make that not happen. If he's okay with it, I'm okay with it. That you have to internalize that, or it will just kill you and eat you up.
And I'm going to stand by it until someone open palm smacks me in the face. Like, people get their attention brought back from these little distractions. I think a lot of times these little mistakes wake people up.
And they humanize what the service is happening. Like, nobody wants a perfect robotic service that like AI produced. No, we want the human element.
Except worship pastors.
Well, sorry. My bad.
but you know when it feeds back, what does everybody do? They turn around and look at the sound booth.
Yeah.
Right? I've got a t-shirt that says, turn back around, I heard it too.
Oh,
that is so good.
that's amazing.
They didn't look at the pastor who, leaned down in front of the wedge.
Or adjusted his mic after a tech had carefully placed it on his face to avoid his beard.
Mm-hmm.
And Kent, do you have any predictions for us about where production might be headed?
Yeah, if it's so much fun to get on AI and have AI build a song based on this or that, and it's pretty stunningly good, right? What prevents that from replacing us at front of house, or replacing our LDs, or replacing our video content creators? I think there will be a point in the near future where, currently there's a guy that has a DM70, Yamaha DM70. He's controlling it verbally. You may have seen that series of videos where he tells it to do this and the faders move there and adjust the parameters. I see that happening, but the key element is that is all just as with the great apes who have learned sign language from the 60s, right? And they've all learned sign language, and it's amazing their capacity, but they've never asked a question. And so AI, for all that it can do, it's a collective of known data. It can't be predictive data in the sense of thinking outside the box. There will always be a place for the human element. And we know in our heart, when we hear a song that's AI generated, there are key elements that kick in that go, wait a minute, this is something that's simply a combination of things I've already heard, known, and loved, but it's not anything new. So I think we will be able to still have control, but we will be able to move to the point where we get so much saturation in an immersive environment. And I love soundscape and I love everything that we're doing. But at some point you go, whoa, none of this is actually real. I mean, just as any performance by a band is not actually real because it's done a track at a time. That event never actually occurred, but we accept it as an occurrence of a singularity, even though it's simply disparate points. However, when we see the band live, now it's real. And just as the most popular mic to use for vocals is still an SM58, and you still have a Strat, and you still have a P-Bass, and you still have an SVT and a Ludwig or DW kit. Rock and roll never embraces the new. It really doesn't. It's simply that moment in time, and we move that forward as we evolve the collective thought of what music is, what it does, how presentations are done. And I think that, yes, there will be all sorts of amazing technology in the near future, but there will always be the place for the people like us who then take that and actually make it human.
I love that. And I also, I feel and I hope that with AI and what it can create, that it will simply inspire humans to up our level of creativity, because, like you said, it's never going to have the human element.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I have heard some really fun stuff on Instagram Reels where this dude will get like Frank Sinatra to sing "Lose Yourself," like Eminem's "Lose Yourself," and then he'll play the drums along with it. It's incredible.
Yeah,
it's funny. AI is a weird spot right now because I feel like it can do, or it can do something amazing. It really just comes down to who can operate it. But look that up, Frank Sinatra, "Lose Yourself." It's really fun. A lot of times when people put their AIs in, it comes in great, and then a lot of times it comes in and it's really crappy. It's quite a disaster. Give us some of your disaster stories from your moments in production. Apparently, you avoided one in Canada. You were not an hour late.
Not an hour late. No, but no. So often, in these 90s, 80s, 90s kind of time frames, we were sort of inventing things. Because you simply had a 12-channel mixer and a 12-channel snake, and then if you needed to add a sub, how do you do that? I mean, we were taking wireless mics and putting them on line level and coming out of the console and wirelessly sending it down to a amplifier on the deck, and just all sorts of crazy stuff to make things happen. You guys may know Stephen Proctor and Luke McElroy. Mm-hmm. So Stephen, great visual artist. Luke is Orange Thread Media. He's doing all the production for Winter Jam again this year. Just great guys, but they were so creative in the 90s, and we would go to Estes Park together and we'd do the GMA Gospel Music Association shows. And, basically they invented their environmental projection back there. Then we had old crappy projectors and no screens, and we just figured out how to make that do. And just all those kind of fascinating things. And sometimes they would fail, but sometimes they would work. And then someone with money would pick it up and go, oh, this is going to be the next thing. But mentioned there in Zambia with Tommy Walker, we were out in the middle of this massive soccer field and had so many issues and problems. I mentioned in the 5-in-1 earlier how the power pole, we had no power. How do you get power? There's only one decent sound system in the entire country. We finally got that at an exorbitant cost, and bring it over, and there's no way to plug anything up. Finally talk to somebody who gets somebody in an old pickup truck who comes out literally with a razor knife, and I talk him into climbing the tower, and he cuts the shielding and takes my cable and throws it, hot wires it over.
Oh my gosh.
Which then, of course, blew up the entire sound system because he didn't give me time to disconnect. Ooh. So then I have to walk over to Tommy Walker before our opening night and say, Tommy, I got nothing. It's all blown up. He said, what do you mean it's all blown up? I said, it's gone. And there's nothing else. And he said, well, we got 20,000 people coming. What are we going to do? I said, we're going to pray. So the entire team got together and prayed over the gear. It was completely gone because all the smoke had been let out. So, it's magic has disappeared. And we then prayed over it, turned it back on. It all came to life, including the Mackie hard disk recorders and everything that had gone up in smoke. And I mean, I pulled the boards out. I mean, you're looking at just burnt boards. I mean, just the resistor networks just blowing, the capacitors all popped, and it all worked. Wow. And that's a God thing.
I don't understand production enough to fully appreciate this, Toby. Like, should that have worked? Like, why did it come back to life? I mean, we know why. How?
I mean, according to Kent's story, it's just the Spirit got into that gear and
that's it.
Made it work again. Like, there is no logical reason why that gear should have worked after it blew like that. When you see the smoke, like he said, the magic's gone. No worky, no more.
Yeah. In so many instances like that, with Israel Houghton, we were at Temple University in Philadelphia, and there was no way to back in with our semi. So to get to the docks, you have to back in the rain. It's a long, nasty thing. And that night I was on the console right in front of the house. And the way it always worked with Israel is that he never showed up for sound check. Aaron Lindsay and the crew took care of that because they're just amazing. If you've ever heard New Breed live, I mean, there's stunning musicianship. And then first notes of the song, opening song, I would hold out the Neumann capsule on the 5000 series Sennheiser, and he would come running down, and I get it. He runs by, grabs it, unmute him, we start. It's crazy. Well, that night, we were about to start, in the center section of my console, caught on fire, just lit up. The whole master section just lit up.
Is that a problem?
A little bit of a problem. It's like, okay, this is not part of the show. The pyro is not till the end song. And so I have to reach down and grab my jacket from underneath, and I start slamming the flames of this massive console. And he's running down. So I hear the notes. So I grab the mic, hand it to him, hit it, and it comes on, and I'm still battling the flames, and we got through the whole show. This was early on. It was early on in the tour. At the end of the night, he calls me back to the green room. He said, buddy, he said, anybody that can get my mic on and put out the flames, you're my front of house guy. That's how I got to run down Fraser Houghton for all those shows. But it's just crazy stuff like that you can't make this stuff up because it's just too bizarre. Just so much fun. It's so boring now because things just work, unless you have the blue screen of death, things just work.
It sounds like before Kent worked at Sweetwater, he had holy water to make all these things work. I mean, that's bizarre. It sounds like honestly a modern day miracle that it was like, we're going to pray and then it worked.
Yep.
That's nuts. Kent, other than praying, when stuff goes wrong, what would be a good tech takeaway that you would tell the church tech community that like, hey, this will make your Sundays better, your lives easier, something, your little tidbit of knowledge, your little nugget you've picked up throughout life?
Two things: make it as simple as possible. We don't need to worry about the reverb on the down snare mic. We really don't, because Joe the plumber in the 14th row doesn't know anything about what you're doing. And the difference between doing it well and doing it perfectly is 0.1% in outcome and 50% in work. So you're going to work so hard and burn yourself out to get that last little bit. And we do want to be excellent, but there's no need to be perfect, because nothing we do in life is perfect. And then if I do something that goes flawlessly and perfect, guess who I credit? I credit me. I always credit me because I did that. When it goes wrong, I blame somebody else. And it's a natural human thing. So I'm going to keep it simple so that fewer things go wrong. And secondly, really focusing on that idea of how God sets us in these positions is that I always felt inadequate. Everybody feels inadequate. Everyone feels like an imposter. When I started, there were no degrees in this. I now teach those degrees, not because I'm some brilliant person, but simply because I've had all these things happen and learned all these things from firsthand experience. So whatever God has you in is your reason to be there. That is it. Don't overthink it. Don't consider yourself a failure when something goes wrong. Don't consider yourself a genius if something goes right. Just hold that middle. Hold it, as 38 Special says, hold on loosely, but don't let go.
He said, don't consider yourself a genius when it goes right and a failure when it goes wrong. What happens when you consider yourself a genius in either scenario all the time? That's what it's like to be Toby Walters. Well, Kent, thanks for joining us, man. Is there anything you want to plug? I mean, we do hear you're working at a little startup called Sweetwater. Might want to get the word out about them.
Sweetwater has been just a fantastic company since I began teaching for them back when I worked for a manufacturer 20 years ago, when they were still at Chuck's house. And we talk about what they are now, but they literally started at Chuck's house. And Chuck's first dealer agreement with JBL was signed on his washing machine, in his house. So certainly he and the entire team are not, they're just Midwestern normal people. The company now, 3,000 employees, $1.8 billion in sales. It's an amazing thing. It really is, but it is still just simply people trying to do the right thing every day. They truly walk that walk. They are not a retailer in that sense. They allow me to go out and do all of these trainings and teaching, which have no sales value whatsoever. I'm doing really in-depth DMX studies, really in-depth, here's how line arrays work, and 5 hours worth of it. And that's not going to result in a sale, but it will result in people within the house of worship community understanding how these things work, why they work, and most importantly, what is vital for them to have? How do we implement it? How do we move the kingdom forward utilizing this gear? How does something that plugs into the wall change a life?
That's a really good encapsulation.
Yeah.
How does something that plugs into a wall change a life?
I love that.
Well, Kent, thanks for joining us, man. We really appreciate the time.
Well, you guys are fantastic. I really appreciate what you're doing in your ministry. It's fantastic.
Sometimes some people say we're a ministry, some people say we're a menace, but here we are, just the same.
We're a menace tree.
Okay.
There you go.
yeah.
All right. We'll see you next week, folks.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the ChurchGear Studios.
So, Blake, I've heard that AI can actually do podcasts for you, but I thought I don't want to use all that technology. I'm going to get one of those apes from the 60s that learned language. So, thanks for joining me, buddy.
Sorry, you can't hear the sign language. I was doing the sign language like the apes. And what I was signing was...
That you should share this episode because, I mean, where else can you hear a trained chimp and Toby do a podcast together with just amazing guests from the church production community?
This signing thing is not working. It has no audio quality. Yep, share this episode.